On today's show, the Atlanta Hawks go into Denver and lose by a final score of 128 to 108. It was much closer than that, though. The Hawks, I thought, battled valiantly down the stretch. It was an impossible spot for Atlanta schedule-wise, in particular without Trae Young, who was unavailable in this game. And the Hawks didn't play perfectly, but they were competitive. And we'll get into all of what transpired in this game and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1405 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Saturday evening into Sunday. And today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. First time users can have a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That is PrizePicks.com, promo code Locked On. And I also want to encourage you at the top of the podcast, as always, to make us your first listen here at Locked On Hawks each and every day. And wherever you get your podcasts, check us out on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, YouTube, etc. I do appreciate you listening to the show. It's been very, very busy this week on the podcast. And of course, that sort of culminates now with a back-to-back. If you missed anything from this week, I talked extensively on this podcast about myriad subjects, deadline, all the road trip coverage, etc. That includes a game last night on Friday into Saturday, and we'll have much more coming up this week as the deadline looms for the Hawks and the entire NBA. Actually, on Thursday afternoon, trade stuff is in the offing, but of course we focus on the games as well in this space. And today's episode is going to be breaking down what became a 20-point loss in Denver, but certainly more competitive than that in a lot of different ways. The Hawks are now 500 on the season. Again, dropping back to 27-27. They are now 2-2 on this road trip. And again, that's not too bad, as we'll get into later on in this episode. And notably, Trae Young unavailable in this game. He was a scratch with a non-COVID illness. He was in the arena and on the bench. He was being shown on the broadcast, but Trae was not well enough to play in this game. And Atlanta would have been in a tough spot already with Trae, and an even tougher spot without him. And generally speaking, It's not going to be a satisfying thing for me to say to anyone, but this is kind of a schedule loss for the Hawks. We'll get into more of that in a second as well. But I thought the Hawks did a pretty good job and kind of a valiant job, honestly, until the floor kind of caved in with like 5 minutes to go in the game. It was a spot where, basically any team in the league would have been an underdog tonight to the Nuggets with this current situation, having to travel and all that stuff, having to play in Denver, where the Nuggets have been awesome this year. And you throw in Trae being out. The Hawks are only down by 8 points with like 6 minutes to go in the game, and they definitely played, I would say, valiantly in this one, despite being shorthanded. On offense, without Trae, this has been, I guess, kind of a controversial thing. I'm not sure why, but there's a segment of the Hawks fan now that does not buy this, but it's very clear in the numbers. I know Murray's been playing a lot better recently, and that's notable and positive. But if you take out garbage time, like our friends at Clean the Glass do on their site, the Hawks are basically 9 points per 100 possessions better with Trae on the floor, and that includes 10 points better on offense this season. And the Hawks ended up with a 104 offensive rating in this game. That isn't a huge surprise. Without Trae, they're not very good on offense. Now, Murray was good in this game, but it's never going to be enough to basically, I shouldn't say never. Most of the time, that 104 offensive rating is not going to be enough to win on the road against Denver, who is a high-powered offensive team. And, one of the big reasons why was the Hawks did not take a lot of threes in this game. And that's not an elixir. It doesn't always work that way. But without Trae, especially, but the Hawks are always a low three-point volume team. It's been frustrating all season long. I talked about that a lot on this podcast. And but not only does Trae take threes, he's also their number one guy who sets them up. So without Trae, they were not able to get a lot of threes off in this game. And the Hawks attempted 45 shots from between 4 feet and 23 feet, which is three-point line. Basically, all 2-point shots outside of 4 feet. The Hawks took 45 shots from that range. They actually shot okay-ish on those shots in this game, but the math problem was very clear for Atlanta. They only took 23s, whereas Denver took 38 threes. And the Nuggets did shoot better on those threes than the Hawks did. But basically, when you take a lot of mid-rangers, you have to be awesome at that compared to a team making a lot of threes, and that was tough. This is not a perfect way to look at this, but I think it's instructive, and stay with me here. The Hawks were 28 out of 65 from every shot they took, twos or threes, outside of 4 feet in this game. 28 of 65. The Nuggets were 29 of 60. So relatively similar outside of 4 feet, but obviously the Nuggets were a little bit better. Not a ton, but a little bit better. But the big difference is that Denver, they made 29 shots from that range, right? Those shots were worth 73 points because you're combining twos and threes, 73 points for the Nuggets outside of the paint. The Hawks had 28 makes again, and they were only worth 62 points because the Hawks took a lot more twos than threes. And the math problem there is not great. You had one fewer make and 11 fewer points, and that is tough. So anyway, the Hawks did shoot pretty decently on twos in this game. 56 points in the paint in this game as well. But overall, they were kind of not able to kind of overcome all of that stuff when you factor in the possession battle stuff as well, because the Hawks lost the free throw battle in this game. They lost the rebounding battle in this game and the turnover battle in this game. And if the Hawks do those three things, they have to shoot the ball incredibly well to win, and they didn't in this game. It was better after halftime. That is notable for sure, but they could not overcome 16 turnovers in the game. The Hawks average about 12 or 13 per game. That's not a terrible number, but it's not great either. And they were also below average in offensive rebounding and free throw creation in this game, all of which is kind of feeding into the substandard offensive performance overall. I will say again, Murray was very good at 28 and 10. He was not alone. The Hawks didn't play like miserably bad on offense in this game, but they weren't great on that end of the floor. And then defensively, it's worth noting that the Nuggets are number one in the league in offense this year and number one in shooting. So they're basically awesome on offense. Jokic is the biggest reason why. He's a two-time MVP, obviously, but they have Jamal Murray, who was great in this game. They have Michael Porter Jr., who's I'm not the biggest Porter Jr. guy in the world, but he's obviously a very good offensive player. And they have they lost KCP in this game, but they're pretty good on offense, let's just say. So the Hawks ended up with a 123 defensive rating. That's a number where you're going to lose most of the time. Obviously, it was very bad in the first half, about a 140. Second half, actually pretty good. The Hawks, they were pretty feisty until the last few minutes of the game. But Denver still, for the game, shot 40% from three, 51% from the field, had 32 assists, and 13 turnovers. And those numbers are incredibly good. And the Hawks were at least feisty at times defensively, but that was not going to be quite enough. Murray was out of his mind. And honestly, if you run into the Nuggets and you get that version of Murray, they are hard to beat because he's not their best player. Jokic is, but Murray had 41 points on 24 shots. And if he does that to you, a lot of them they're very contested. Murray's not a guy who's going to create a ton of open looks. He's just like he makes shots off the dribble a lot, and he had it going in this game, and that was kind of the death blow for the Hawks down the stretch. They did a pretty decent job on Jokic in this game, actually. Jokic ended up having 14 points, 18 rebounds, and 10 assists, but he wasn't like totally dominant. He was very good, as he always is, but he wasn't, at least scoring-wise, super dominant this game. And especially Conway did a good job in the second half, which we'll come back to later on in the podcast. But something to note here as well, Denver had 19 fast break points, and some of that was the transition defense being pretty messy for the Hawks in this game. Again, they didn't play perfectly, and I am sure, as sort of a bridge to my last topic here at the top of the podcast, that this is at least partly due to the heavy legs. Nate McMillan talks about heavy legs multiple times in the press conference after the game, and this is what I want to get to now. I know I got a couple of messages from people on Patreon and Twitter kind of making fun of me a little bit for mentioning this so many times in the last week or so, but I'm going to do it one more time here for good measure. The point spread in this game, according to our friends at FanDuel, was the Hawks as 10-point underdogs in this game. Again, 10-point underdogs for Atlanta with one injury. Granted, it was Trae, but only one injury in this game. The Hawks did beat the Nuggets actually in Atlanta without Trae this year. But all that to say, it was the largest point spread underdog that the Hawks have been so far this season. And they only had one injury in the game. They were 9.5-point underdogs in Memphis back in mid-December. And that was a game where if you're a diehard fan, you might remember this. The Hawks basically punted that game. They sat Trae, Dejounte, Collins, Capella, and Bogey on a back-to-back in Memphis and basically just assured themselves of a loss. And they lost by, I think, like 20 points in that game. That was the last time the Hawks were an underdog this big, and actually were a bigger underdog tonight than they were then. And basically it speaks to the difficulty of the matchup, basically. And to only have one guy out, even if it is Trae, and still beat underdogs by that much, tells you that this was an impossible schedule spot. The title of this podcast, I think, is going to be something involving schedule loss, and it's a term that's thrown around in the league a lot. And I'm not sure that it doesn't mean you have to lose this game, but there are some games on the schedule over 82 games where one team is at a very difficult situation. And this is one of those games for the Hawks. And it's referred to as a schedule loss because it's possible to overcome it, but it's hard to do. So again, the Nuggets are really good. Number one, they're number one in the West right now. They're 24-4 at home this season. That speaks for itself. They still haven't lost in about 2 months with Jokic playing and at home. So you throw in the rest advantage there for the Nuggets. They hadn't played in 2 days. Denver has been home all week, whereas the Hawks have been on the West Coast road trip the entire time. And again, altitude, all that fun stuff. It makes life hard for opponents, even when they're not getting in very late, coming back from Salt Lake City overnight. And one more thing here, Lauren Williams of the AJC had this stat. after the game tonight. Over the last 20 seasons, NBA teams are 4-15 in Denver when they play in Salt Lake City the previous night. So basically, all that wrapped into one. The Nuggets are awesome this year, and the heavy legs mentions were coming. It's impossible to attribute specific things to the situation or tired legs or altitude or whatever, but the Hawks lost on the margins in a way they don't usually lose on the margins. The defensive stuff was not always buttoned up in this game. The turnovers early on, etc. So all those factors come into play in some form. I'm not saying the Hawks couldn't win. In fact, yesterday I said pointedly the Hawks definitely still could win this game. But in terms of, I said it one last time here. This is probably the most difficult schedule spot of the entire season for Atlanta when you take into account location, back-to-back, opponent, altitude, and obviously you throw in Trae to make it even worse. And that's kind of where I am on this one. So broadly speaking, yes, it's a loss. I think basically any loss right now causes at least some part of the fan base to panic and maybe overreact and get very mad. And I get all that. I always stress that this is a long season. NBA games, you can't treat like college football games. You cannot just go up and down every single night in the NBA. And honestly, I get the frustrations, and we'll get into some of why later on about the end of the game and rotations and all that stuff. But broadly speaking, I think this is not a loss to be mad about. This is a schedule loss. This is a game the Hawks were quote unquote supposed to lose. If you're a 10-point underdog, you're supposed to lose more often than not. So we'll get into all of what transpired in this game, and obviously there's stuff to observe and take away and kind of analyze. But that's kind of the big thing here is that this is a very tough spot for the Hawks, and they battled the entire way. But losing this game is not exactly a black mark on the organization at this point in time. All right, we'll have more on this game in a second when it comes to the game flow, as well as later on in the podcast, some player evaluations. But first, a word from our sponsors on today's show. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. If you're looking for a daily fantasy option this year, make sure you check out the award-winning app at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. I know that I love it, and I know that you will as well. It's so very easy to use. I've been playing there for a while at PrizePicks. It's really a lot of fun. It's kind of a breezy setup as well. And all you have to do is pick 2 to 6 players and actually choose whether they have more or less than a certain number of points or rebounds or assists or fantasy points. A lot of different categories available to you at PrizePicks, and there, up to 25 times. Yes, 25 times more on the money on each and every entry if you want to go ahead and go that route. They offer numbers on any sport you can think of. Beyond the NBA, of course, they have football stuff, NFL, college football. They have baseball. They have NHL and PGA and soccer and esports and much more. And a whole entry can be done just a minute or less. It's that quick and it's that easy. Plus, it's just you against the projected numbers. And they have safe and fast withdrawals of PrizePicks. They're operating in more than 30 states now, in addition to Canada. And you download the PrizePicks app or go to PrizePicks.com right now to sign up and play DFS. And first-time users can have a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 if you use the promo code Locked On. Don't forget to enter that promo code Locked On at sign up for the instant deposit match up to $100. Check it all out now at PrizePicks. All right, and we'll dive in now to how the game actually flowed. And it's worth noting the Hawks actually have a top 10 road record in the NBA this year. They've not been great at home by any means, but they're in the top 10 of the league in road winning percentage so far. At least coming into the night they were. So that's at least encouraging. I mentioned it before, but Trae missed this game. He was actually listed as questionable with the non-COVID illness. Ended up not playing, was on the bench, and hopefully he's back on Tuesday when the Hawks return to action in New Orleans. And of note, as well on the injury-ish front, Bogdanovich played in this game. He was not listed on the injury report at all. Only the second time all year that Bogey played both ends of a back-to-back. The Hawks have been pretty careful with Bogey this year with the knee stuff, so perhaps an encouraging sign that he's at least ready to go back-to-backs, at least when he's feeling pretty good. And the Hawks were at full strength minus Trae, which is obviously the biggest loss that they could possibly have, but still they had everybody else available in this one. Denver was at full strength because Jokic and Aaron Gordon both were questionable, ended up playing. Obviously, it would have been easier for the Hawks and better for the Hawks had they not played in this game. At the same time, I'm of the mind usually, at least in the regular season, that you just want to play the games in front of you. Obviously, I get that most fans just want to see the team win, and I get all that. Jokic is a fun player to watch, as is Gordon. So I think if you're a Hawks fan, you want to have that measured against the best teams in the league, and the Nuggets are playing very well right now. So I get all sides of that. But anyway, Denver was at full strength in this game. As for the game itself, AJ actually started in place of Trae in this game. I generally like that. I think Nate started Aaron Holiday last time that Trae missed the game. And I said then it felt like it was matchup based because they were playing a small team that had small guards. And against a team in Denver that does not have small guards, they went bigger, and that was the right decision. Also, I think keeping Bogey's minutes down was probably part of that too, because they've started Bogey at times when one of the guards has been out as well. But I like going with AJ. That was a good move, and that worked out pretty well, I thought, for the Hawks in this game. A lot of offense early on in this one. There were 37 points in the first 5.5 minutes combined from these two teams. Both teams were shooting 7% from the floor or higher at that point. The Hawks were actually 9 of 10 from the floor to start the game and up by 1. So it was a barrage of offense in the early going. The Hawks made their first 9 two-point attempts in the game. They did a good job attacking in the early going as well. Rotationally, there was one surprise. It was Trent Forrest as the first sub for Dejounte Murray. Murray kind of got the Trae treatment in the first quarter of that brief mid-quarter sub. In the second half, actually didn't do that. But Trent Forrest played, role-wise, Trent didn't play like an overwhelming amount in this 12 minutes in this game. That's fine, but I was actually surprised to see him that early on in this one. Aaron Holiday played a little bit as well. Bogey and Okongwu after that, then Jalen Johnson. They played a 10-minute rotation because Aaron started the second quarter, and kind of not a huge surprise there, but kind of noteworthy that the sort of the order that it came in some ways. When Jokic went out of the game late in the first quarter, the Hawks were down by 3 points, and I wanted to mark that because I talked about this a lot. Trae's on-off splits are enormous. No one's on-off splits are as big as Jokic's on-off splits. Jokic for the season, this is crazy, for cleaning the glass, coming into the night, had the Nuggets being 23.8 points per 100 possessions better with Jokic on the floor versus off. Basically, they're the best team in the league when he plays, and they are the worst team in the league when he sits, and even more extreme than that. That is an absolutely bonkers number, and I wanted to circle that because the Hawks needed to take advantage of the Jokic off minutes in this game. In the first half, they didn't do that. And that was part of why they were sort of building that deficit that they were actually having by halftime. In the second half, they did win the minutes without Jokic, which is important. But no surprise here. But the Hawks lost this game by 20 points, right? Jokic was plus 20 in 34 minutes. So Jokic plus 20 in 34 minutes. He was dead even. They were dead even with Jokic off the floor, and that's not going to be good enough. The Hawks needed to win those minutes without Jokic. They did in one half, not the other. The Hawks had offensively kind of cooled off a little bit at the end of the first quarter, but they were down by 5 after 12 minutes of action while shooting 65% from the floor. It's really hard to do. To be down 5, shooting that well just means they were getting killed everywhere else. And rebounding-wise, turnover-wise, as talked about early in the podcast, that was a problem early, and it was a problem often in this game. And the Nuggets were making a lot of shots as well. I didn't really understand the Trent Forrest, Aaron Holiday usage. Not that they both played, that's fine. But I think generally speaking, Aaron Holiday, I've kind of joked and also not joked that Aaron Holiday is a 3-and-D wing who happens to be 5'10", basically. And I would have played him with Dejounte Murray and had Trent Forrest be the guy that was on the floor without Dejounte. And they kind of largely flipped that around. I'm not really sure why. My idea was that they were using Trent to defend Jamal Murray when Dejounte came out of the game. But that wasn't always the case either. So I'm not really sure what that was about. Obviously, you'd rather have just one guy who was better than those guys, but they kind of occupied and split one rotation spot in this game. The Nuggets went up by 10 early in the second quarter. The Hawks had their kind of first really bad slow stretch offensively. They had 2 points in about 4 minutes to open the second quarter. They were probably lucky to be only up by 8 at that point. There was one example that was kind of a rough one where the Hawks had they had numbers in transition. It was like a 4-on-3 break, and it ended up with Okongwu taking like a 17-footer. Not a terrible shot, but just not the shot you want when you have an advantage necessarily. And the Hawks were really kind of cratering on offense overall in the second quarter. At one point, they had 9 points in like a 7.5-minute stretch. They had 3 turnovers. They were 4-3 from the floor. And it stabilized a little bit. Then they gave up one more big run at the end of the first half. The Nuggets closed on an 11-2 push to go up by 18 at halftime. And candidly, the Hawks being down 18 on the road, back-to-back in Denver, you kind of expect the Hawks to give up the game basically at that point in time. Not all the way, but certainly that's what I was saying before about the Hawks being kind of valiant in the way they battled in this game, because it felt kind of over at halftime, to be honest. But generally speaking, the Nuggets were incredible on offense in the first half. They scored 70 points on 50 possessions. That's a 140 offensive rating. That is ludicrous. They had 2 turnovers and 9 offensive rebounds. That's not the ratio you want if you're the Hawks. And honestly, the shooting battle was pretty even in the first half. The Hawks were down by 18, though, because everything else went badly. Only took 8 threes in the first half. Again, that was the Trae absence impact and all of that stuff. They did have 15 assists, but not a lot of juice beyond that. After halftime, I thought it was actually kind of a sneaky important thing. KCP went out for the Nuggets. He was not great in the first half, but he has been really good this year, generally speaking, and he rolled an ankle in the early going. The Hawks were down by 22 points with 10 minutes to go in the third quarter, but then Dejounte got going. So Dejounte had an 8-0 run by himself. He hit 3 jump shots, 2 of which were threes to get back into the game down by 14 points. He actually played the whole third quarter because he really had it going. Him and Hunter both played the entire third quarter. The Hawks were pretty upset with the officiating throughout this game, but especially in the third quarter. And I know Hawks fans were saying that as well. I don't do a lot of officiating talk on the show. I will say the Hawks did not get a friendly whistle in this game. No question about that. But in the third quarter, it was kind of came to a head a little bit. Collins got called for his third foul on what was a pretty clean block, it seemed. Nate actually rarely would challenge that play, but because it was Collins' third and because it was a pretty obvious bad call, he challenges it. He usually saves that for the fourth quarter, but he didn't this time. And it was overturned, and the Hawks got the ball. So it was actually a pretty impactful winning challenge. And the Hawks kind of chipped away a little bit, got within 13 with like 3 minutes to go. Importantly, after they had a ton of turnovers in the first half, the Hawks were able to take care of the ball a lot better in the second half, especially in the third quarter. They had no turnovers for about 10 minutes in the third quarter. And that was part of the reason why they were able to cut into the lead down from 22 down to like 12, 13 at the end. And the Nuggets finally got some empty possessions on offense as well. But the Hawks went from, again, down 20 with 6.5 minutes to go in the third quarter to down 11 at the end of the quarter. And that's what they had to do. They had to chip away. Jokic was on the bench for some of that. Murray had 15 points and created 9 more points off assists, I should say, in the third quarter. He was brilliant in that period, and they held the Nuggets to only 27 points on 26 trips, which is pretty excellent as well. But because they played Murray and Hunter the entire third, they kind of had to go with the bench unit start the fourth quarter, and that actually worked. That actually worked as well. Trent Forrest was pretty good in that stretch, and with Jokic on the bench, this is a very important thing because Jokic being on the bench means that the Nuggets were flailing a little bit. And I thought Okongwu, after kind of a rough first half, to be honest, was awesome in the second half. Like really, really, really good after halftime. And there was a pretty funny stretch actually with like 8 minutes to go where both teams just could not make a layup, either due to missing layups or just like having them blocked. It was Christian Brown. It was Okongwu. It was a couple times around the rim. It was kind of just a funny sequence. But the Hawks were down by between 8 points and 11 points for 5.5 minutes straight in the fourth quarter. They just were right in that range. They couldn't quite get into like 5 or 6, and they were able to, again, impressively in my mind, avoid letting go of the rope. Okongwu was a big part of that. He did a good job on Jokic in that point. The Hawks, though, had a couple chances though to like get it back to 6 with some makeable shots, just couldn't make them. And then Nate went back to the starters as he almost always does with like 5 minutes to go, and that did not work at all. I will at least note this now. I know this is not going to be a popular thing to even say out loud, even though this is not me talking. I'm just giving you the rationale. Okongwu would have had to play like 15.5 minutes straight to end the game if he stayed in the entire way, which is not really realistic. It happens every once in a while, but that's a tough ask, obviously. And that group is playing well, but also, he's going to go back to starters most of the time. I didn't have a huge problem with it. I think I would have gone, and I tweeted this in the moment, I would have closed with Okongwu. I think he was the better center in the second half in particular of this game. But, it is what it is. It's worth noting the Hawks were down by 10 when the bench went back to the bench and the starters came back in. Down 10, 6 minutes to go on the road in Denver. You are a huge underdog. Was it going to be over? You never know that. But I don't think the Hawks lost this game, quote unquote, because of the substitutions there. I saw some of that reaction after the game. That's a pretty crazy thing to say. Obviously, the results did not go well after that, so no question about that. I think the anecdotal evidence there is not good. But I'll just say, I get taking him out there because he couldn't. I shouldn't say he couldn't. He probably shouldn't have played the entire rest of the way in terms of minutes. But also Okongwu was playing well at that point in time, so it's kind of hard to do that. Anyway, after that, the game basically flipped. The Nuggets scored 3 times in a row. Murray missed 2 jumpers in a row that were kind of settled mid-rangers, and we talked about that a little bit earlier on with the Hawks just taking way too many mid-rangers in this game. And then down by 14 at that point was pretty tough. And then the dagger really arrived with Jamal Murray hitting back-to-back, difficult shots for sure. Like not even bad defense, just Murray shot-making display, essentially. He scored 9 straight for Denver, and after the last one went down, they were up by 19, and it was basically over. The Hawks cleared the bench in a way that they don't always do. I was actually kind of surprised Nate did that, although it was probably the obvious move. And the Hawks, by the way, just stopped scoring. So it wasn't just the defense. It felt like it was the defense at the end of the game because Murray kept scoring, but the Hawks only scored 4 points in about 4.5 minutes before the actual game ended. So from the 7-minute mark or so down to the 3-minute mark, they only scored 4 points. And that was untenable on top of the shot making from Jamal Murray. So anyway, a lot to get to there, but it's one of those things where the Nuggets were the better team in this game. Murray, if Denver gets that from Murray, they're hard to beat, let's just say. and they like to group their guys together. Like Gordon, Murray, and Jokic play together a lot, and when they played, they dominated essentially in this one. When they didn't. But that was kind of the difference in a lot of ways. And the Hawks lost the fourth quarter by 9 points. I will say again, if you didn't watch this game, the Hawks were much more competitive than minus 20 would indicate. This was an 8-point game with 5.5 minutes to go. So they were right in this one. Was it going to be a win? Probably not, but they were at least more competitive than the final score actually looks in this spot. All right, we'll get into the individual player breakdowns in a moment, and there's plenty to discuss there as well. But first, our last break to hear from our sponsors on today's podcast. Today's show is brought to you by Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious treat this time of year, you don't want actually all the fat and calories that go along with it. You only need to try a Built Bar. Built Bar is fantastic because if you have a goal like I do to eat healthier and better this year, it's a perfect option for you. It actually tastes fantastic and it's healthy as well. And Built Bar is also so delicious that you won't even believe that it's healthy, to be honest, because it has 100% real chocolate. Yes, real chocolate on the outside of the Built Bar, and they have a ton of awesome flavors. My personal favorite, cookies and cream, but they also have peanut butter brownie, coconut almond. The list goes on, and they have only 130 calories plus 4 grams of sugar to go along with a whopping 17 grams of protein. And you don't have to wait a long time to actually get your Built Bars as well. For really a while now, I've been telling you to order your Built Bars at Built.com, and that's still a fantastic option. Built.com is a great website. They have all kinds of options for you. But if you don't want to wait that long, you can actually get your Built Bars right now at your local Sam's Club or Walmart. That's right. Walk into Walmart right now and grab a box of Built Bars immediately. Or if you're closer to a Sam's Club, get a 13-bar box at Sam's in a hurry. Make sure you check out Built Bar and dive in today. Okay, and we'll kind of ignore the total garbage time of Frank Kaminsky and Vit Krejci in this game and focus on the guys who played real minutes. So that there were 10 of them. Aaron Holiday played 8 minutes. He was 0-3 from the floor, had 0 points, 3 turnovers. Aaron was not good in this game. I think there's been a little bit too much negativity about Aaron Holiday in general this season. I think he's done a pretty decent job on a minimum contract, but he is overextended, and I've made fun of it, but it's really true. He just can't run the offense. He's a 3-and-D wing. He cannot be the only point guard on the floor. And that was very evident. There was one fast break that was a disaster that he was engineering. He just can't do it. And it is what it is. He's a limited player. On the minimum, it's totally fine. That was a good signing, but he's just being overstretched. And that's part of the fallout of not having Trae. There's nobody else to go to in that spot. Trent Forrest was fine. I thought 2 points in 12 minutes. He's never going to be a high impact offensive player, but he moves the ball. Defensively, he's pretty good. He had one nice layup in the fourth quarter. That was his only attempt of the night. That was a nice bucket. So he was fine. He did his job, but obviously not going to blow your doors off by any means. Okongwu, again, tale of two halves. I think in the first half, he was pretty brutal, actually. Second half, really, really, really good. 6 points, 6 rebounds, had 3 blocks, 3-7 from the floor. Not super efficient for Okongwu in this game, but the highs were very high in that late third quarter or the fourth quarter stretch. First half is kind of like almost forgotten because of how good he was in the second half. But I will say overall over the last 2 days, he was very good on Friday night. So lots of good signs from Okongwu in recent days. But he was just okay on the whole, but it was because he was awesome late and not so great early on. Jalen Johnson, 11 points, 5 rebounds, and a steal for Jalen in 16 minutes. Took 8 shots, 5 of 8 from the floor, 5-7 from 2. I thought Jalen was pretty good. He was actually dead even. He had the best plus minus on the team at dead even in this game. I thought he kind of earned that. He was pretty solid off the bench. I love they're going to keep playing him, and they should. And he's been giving him good minutes in the last few games. And then Bogey, 8 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals, and a block. He was at least active defensively in this one. Had 5 fouls. Kind of funny there. 4 of 8 from 2. 0 of 2 on threes. Bogey, I saw something like really. I thought he was like okay. I think he was like pretty frisky defensively by his standards in this game. Offensively, didn't give them a whole lot, and they kind of needed something there that he didn't really give them in this game. But he was like kind of like it was a C game for him, average. To the starters in this game, Capella was not great. It was 12 points, 11 rebounds for Clint. I thought he played okay in the first half in particular. Second half, he struggled a little bit. I thought Congo was definitely the better option after halftime. Clint was not he had a couple nice passes that I will say. No assists, but a couple of good moves from him, like good ball moving opportunities from Clint, but not his best work. And it's not a huge surprise to me that like the old guys didn't play great in this one because back-to-backs, like they hurt a little bit more as you get older. And Clint and Bogey are the 2 oldest guys that play, and they both had below average games probably, or at least average or below average games. So not a huge surprise there. AJ Griffin played well, I thought, 15 points, 4 assists. I took 11 shots. He was under control the entire way. He had kind of a rough start, at least for a few minutes, but once he settled in defensively, he was much more locked in after the first few minutes. And he was on the floor when the bench shooters had some success in this one. So I thought he played well. I like starting him again in this game, and I think that was a good sign moving forward how he looked. Collins was not great. 6 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, and a block. He had the hard fall on Friday and said he was, according to the broadcast, said he was sore coming into the night. Not a huge part of the offense, which is okay. Like, there's some nights where John it's kind of enraging to me when he doesn't get the ball. In this game, I thought that wasn't necessarily a huge problem. Like, him taking 5 shots is not good. I will say that, but it didn't stand out to me that they were just freezing him out the way they have at times this year. Defensively, he was okay, but he just kind of an anonymous game in a lot of ways, and not the best way possible for him. Hunter had 20 again in this one. Not the most efficient necessarily. I mean, he was fine efficiency-wise, just not crazy efficient. 3 rebounds. Did have 4 assists. That's a good number for Hunter. Ball movement is not always his strength, so good to see that. Defensively, he did a pretty good job on Porter at times in this one as well. And then Dejounte Murray. So 28 points, 10 assists for Dejounte, 2 blocks and a steal. He went 7 of 13 on 2s and 3 of 8 on 3s. 7 free throw attempts is good for him as well. That's not always a huge strength of Dejounte's. And look, he did what you could ask him to do without Trae. He carried the offense when he was out there. The third quarter, when the Hawks were able to cut the lead basically in half, was because Murray was awesome in that third quarter. So he couldn't do it by himself. Nobody can. But I thought he was quite good for the most part in this one. And then obviously a little bit probably too mid-range heavy, but that's just going to be his game forever, I think. So I can't really pick that apart too much. And I thought Murray gave him a lot in this spot. Okay, last thing before we get out of here on this Saturday, which is actually, it's now Sunday as I'm recording this podcast. A trade, I'm not sure it's a rumor, but it's a trade sparkler at this point. Mark Stein, who is an awesome reporter, of course, in his newsletter reported Saturday afternoon that the Hawks have some interest in Matisse Thybulle. So most of the rumors or pseudo rumors even around the Hawks this entire cycle have been about the Hawks players going out. This is the first one in a while that's actually about the Hawks liking a player on the outside. Obviously, there have been players bandied about in Collins trades, or at least Collins fake trades, but this is one where the Hawks actually actively, reportedly want a guy, and that is Thybulle. Now, there was nothing definitive in Stein's reporting about what the return would be or how close it might be. He has talked about Sacramento being in the mix for Thybulle, and there is some buzz that Philadelphia is going to look to move Thybulle. I'll say this. I'll also say this. My friend Andrew Kelly said this on Twitter as well, and I agree with him. It isn't the best sign for Matisse Thybulle that a contender, and Philly is a contender this year. Obviously, they're not the most trustworthy team historically, but they're trying to win a championship this year. And if they're opening up deals to trade him, that isn't the best sign for how impactful he probably has been there recently. But he's an expired contract, $4.5 million or so this year. Then he'll be a restricted free agent at the end of the season. This is still his rookie deal. Actually, he's pretty cheap. The logical way, if the Hawks were going to do this, and again, I'm not reporting any of this. This is just Mark. I'm now going to speculate on what I know. And the logical way to get Thybulle, if you were the Hawks, would be to trade Justin Holiday and something else, draft stuff for Thybulle to Philadelphia. I'll say this now. I would not trade a first-round pick for Matisse Thybulle. He has huge offensive limitations. I've argued he might be, I won't say he's one of the worst offensive perimeter players in the league. Full stop. Now, is he a good defender? Obviously. He's a havoc creator. I think he's probably overrated as an on-ball guy defensively. I think Trae exposed that in the playoffs a couple years ago. But off the ball, he's a terror. Obviously, a very talented guy, first-round pick. And I think he would definitely help the Hawks. He's better than what they have, for sure. I'm not saying otherwise. But offensively, he is a work in progress, to be kind. But all that said, he's cheaper than Holiday for the Hawks side. That's very helpful. Now, Philadelphia has their own considerations, too. For one, Justin makes more than Thybulle does, and it actually doesn't work 1-for-1. So the money has to be a little bit closer. Maybe if my fake trade would be if you were to throw in Tyrese Martin, who's very, very cheap from Atlanta, and take Paul Reed back, who's a little bit more money than Martin. That deal works in the trade machine. So anyway, we're not quite there yet, but I think that multiple avenues there. I think Philadelphia probably wants to get out of the tax trading Thybulle, and the Hawks can't really do that for them unless they were to take Thybulle for a cheaper guy. But if they do that, then the Hawks are on the tax, and they're not going to do that either. So we'll see, as I'll say that. I don't think this is very close at this point in time. And just for the record, I would guess educatedly, but guess that a Holiday plus a single second round pick won't get it done. I would imagine somebody else is going to offer at least that much or more. So I think if I had to guess what a deal would look like, it would probably be Holiday in 2 seconds. If it's a first, I will criticize that. I think that's a bad idea. But if it's a Holiday in 2 seconds, I don't love it, but it's fine. We'll get into that more later on if we want to or if we need to. But I thought it was always interesting that a new name popped up. And it's kind of in that vein that Tyron Jones and I talked about this last week about like a player who is in that salary range that's cheap enough, kind of a second draft guy in Thybulle. Again, I'm not a huge believer in the offense really at all, but he's a guy who at least can function, can play. He's obviously has a great trait. He's a great defender, at least off the ball as a habit creator. So notable, and we'll get into that more if the reporting ramps up in the coming days. But as a reminder, the deadline is Thursday afternoon, 3 p.m. And the Hawks only have one game between now and then. The Hawks play Tuesday night in New Orleans. That was supposed to be a TNT game. It's not anymore. I will have at least one podcast, which I'm planning to between now and then. So stay tuned for all of that. Please subscribe to the podcast. But again, the Hawks had a busy week this week, but now only one basketball game for the Hawks between now and the deadline on Thursday afternoon. They actually play about 5 hours later at home against the Suns. But we'll have full coverage as always. Please subscribe to the show across platforms. If you want to do me a favor, the best way to do that is to subscribe and auto-download the show multiple times, as well as to follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland. Follow the show on Twitter at Lots on Hawks. Follow my Patreon if you would like to do that to support me there. Patreon.com/BT Rowland. Thank you, as always, for listening to the show, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And we'll see you all next time.